welcome to this new episode of the Pearl Dialogues. My name is Wazee, and together with Elin, I host this podcast. And here, what we do is explore the nature of reality, which primarily happens through the lens of the teaching of the Diamond Approach. If you are unfamiliar with this teaching and want to learn more, you can check out the links in the description. In today's conversation, we meet with Byron Brown, who is a senior teacher in this school, the Diamond Approach School, and he has been teaching for more than 25 years. What struck me about this conversation was the candor, the sense of wholeness, the sense of natural simplicity, humanity, depth. And I feel a lot of gratitude in my heart for this conversation and for meeting Byron. He's also the author of the book Soul Without Shame that addresses the superego and the inner critic, an excellent book that I've read 2 times, actually. In our conversation today, we do talk a little bit about the superego, but we also talk about ambition, state of the world. We talk about living life as opposed to making progress, as opposed to getting somewhere. And Byron shares intimately from his own transition into now getting older and the shift into another stage of life. A very heartful conversation, and I would appreciate if you could take the time to rate our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or like the video on YouTube. It simply helps to share this work and this project with more people. So yeah, it's something I would appreciate personally. Now, let's flow into the episode. Much love.
This might be the first official podcast.
Okay. Yeah, so it's an invention of the modern age, huh?
Yep.
Age, and
Yes.
in the younger generations are very familiar with that. Do you listen to podcasts at all?
I haven't recently. About 5 years ago, I listened to them quite a bit. Back when they were in their infancy, there was a few that I was following pretty regularly, and then lately I'm much more into listening to audiobooks. So that's what I listen to more than podcasts. But at some point I may shift back over. I don't know. There's certainly been some interesting ones cross my screen that seemed like, well, maybe that would be a good thing to check in on.
Yeah. And what would you say you're interested in nowadays? What are you curious about? What are you looking into? What are you studying?
I don't know whether I'm actively studying something, but this last 6 months, I'd say there's been a good bit of energy on relationship. And I've been married to my wife for 30 years, 31 years actually. And we continue to work on our communication and our contact and our depth of connection. And we've recently gone back into working with a couples therapist. And so it's been a rich and challenging area to be learning more of. It's really a very key place for me right now to be learning about myself and ways I'm still caught in my early history. So that's been a rich area. Just started listening to an audiobook about that also. So yeah, that's That's something in terms of kind of study and investigation. Yeah, mostly when I'm not working as a teacher, I'm enjoying just being and living my life and doing activities that I like to do rather than at the moment being in a heavy study or investigation or research phase. Feels more like just kind of being with the simplicity of daily activity and appreciating my age and the things. I go a lot slower now than I used to go, and so I can't do as much in a day, and just become more settled into taking my time doing just ordinary things with the day, but letting them just be more fully what they are and enjoying that. Yeah.
Would you say that that transition for you, how would you describe that transition into a slower pace and the shift of perhaps, I don't know if you would say a shift of attitude or a shift of, you mentioned the shift of pace. How was that transition for you?
Well, it feels, in one sense, it feels like a very welcome change after I'm 70, almost 72. And so felt like I had a very full, the last 25, 30 years being a teacher and a lot of activity. And first part of that, a lot of ambition to do everything I could and be involved in as many opportunities as presented themselves to me. And that was good, but it also, I didn't feel as much appreciating and valuing just being in my life in a simple way. And the last 5 years, 5+ years, 5 to 10 years, has been a shift away from the focus of doing and accomplishing more and being as being as active in service and the various roles that I have had as a teacher. And it's gone along with the fact of being in my 60s and recognizing changes in my own capacity physically and energetically. And and more as as the ambition let go and the slowing down. And how has it been? I feel like it's been a very rich and satisfying process to slow down. There was a little bit of stuff inside about, well, I'm not as busy as I was. I'm not getting as much done, and that's very true. I don't get as much done as I used to. But I've found that partly I've cut back on my work some as a teacher, and that's allowed me more space. Then also I found out that I really didn't need to be under pressure in myself to do things as much. Some of that was my own internal pressure and the way I was holding things in my mind, that my life didn't actually require some of that. So, in many ways, my life has gotten simpler. The pandemic was, one element of that. in some ways, my life didn't change that much with the pandemic because much of my work is from home. And I've always liked getting out to walk in the parks around here, and that didn't really change with, that was the one physical activity and outdoors that I could do during the pandemic. So I kept doing that. But just the fact that life slowed down in general in culture, in society with the pandemic, it supported this sense of just being simpler, just taking a few hours in the morning to get my day going between my exercise and, getting breakfast and checking in with the news and listening to a book, and just in some ways it feels like my world has gotten simpler and smaller in a certain way, because I don't I'm not really socially that active. My wife and we do connect with people, some for sure, but I'm not a heavily social person in terms of my activities. So um, yeah, life's just been simpler and quieter, and um, I like it. It's been a nice change from how busy I was for so many years, always with so many things. One of the elements of it was that I always felt there was always so much to do. No matter how much I did, there was almost always so much that I wasn't doing, still had to be done. So there was this sense of carrying a kind of internal load that even when I had time off, or we'd take a vacation or whatever, we'd have a little space, but there was awareness that when I got home, there would be all this coming back in again and filling me up, filling up my life, and creating a kind of pressure. And so I think one of the biggest things change has been, um, having enough space and getting clear about my priorities so that I can actually feel periods of time where I don't have a lot that I have to be doing. I mean, there definitely are things about the house or about retirement or about various things that can be dealt with, but it's not stuff that I need to pressure myself about when I'm not in the midst of work. So I don't feel so much like, oh, I can't really rest because I've still got so many things to do. It's more like, no, I can just take my time and go for a long walk, and you know so that's been a very welcome shift in the last years. Even as I get more busy to go travel again, the last couple of years I've been doing a lot of traveling to Europe once again, which I enjoy, but I've been able to keep enough space before and after and at home at various times to allow a different feeling in my life than I had for many years, and didn't know whether I would ever have unless I completely stopped working. But I seem to have found much more of a balance, I guess is one way to put it, much more balance between work and rest and play, and just be here, more and more sense of life coming out of being rather than having to find your way down to being somehow through all the activity, but more sense of resting and being and letting things come out of that.
While you're speaking, I'm contemplating and reflecting on the fact that me and Elin are in such a different stage of life. I mean, in some sense, on the complete opposite end of life than what you are. So I'm curious to hear, Elin, how you relate to ambition and that drivenness and that balance of work, pure enjoyment, and life unfolding. How do you relate to what Byron is talking about?
I notice my heart gets a bit activated when you ask this question. I don't really know how or where to start answering. I mean, I'm a mom to start. I have a 3-year-old. And in some ways, I relate with not being able to do so many things in a day that I used to do. It's like I need to surrender to the little one and his needs, even though he's getting older and it gets easier. That was a big shift. In terms of ambition, I feel a lot of gratitude for having found the diamond approach or this type of inner work, dealing with the heart. That's what I tell my son when I go working. I say, Mama is going to work with the heart now for a week, and then he knows. Then my mother, his grandmother, comes and said, it's a symbolic heart. I'm like, yes, we know. But I don't know if I really do I have ambition? For sure. Like I would really aspire to be a teacher one day, but that's coming also from a teacher in the diamond approach, but it's also coming from a sense of wanting to pass it forward. Like realizing I am young, my teachers are gonna die, and new people will be born. Like, so that I can sense. But that's something that I just kind of know. And I don't know, see, like when I hear this word ambition, that I connect it with like a ego structure thing, and maybe it doesn't have to be. It's not the same as when I was like 18 and I wanted to be the CEO of the Royal Theatre House in the capital. Like that was another type of ambition that I have dropped. I'm not interested in that anymore. Yeah. And otherwise, like listening to you, Byron, I can feel a sense of relief or relaxation. And I feel like, you know, even though you're a man and you're much older than me, I feel like I can see parts of myself in you as another human being. And I get a bit touched saying that. Yeah, I don't know. There's some type of gratitude of seeing another human being working and living with being that's further ahead on the journey in your body than me. That's something there that touches me. Yeah.
How about you, Wazee?
Yeah. First and foremost, what I want to share is I feel so delightfully comfortable being with you both. And also, the moment I came in contact with you, Byron, I'm touched by it as well. There is a sense of homeliness and genuinely feeling comfortable being myself with you. And that to me, that's just a very precious and deep feeling actually in my heart, in my body. I can feel it in my nervous system as a kind of relaxation and an overarching sense of pleasure in my being. I can also relate a lot to the topic that you're touching on here. And this topic of ambition is something that I've reflected upon a lot lately. And this drivenness that I definitely have experienced a lot of in my last 10 years, especially, or actually more than that. But when it comes to since the beginning or the start of my spiritual activation, drive has been a very central part of that. And that has been parallel with also a part of me that is ambitious in wanting, in being an aspirational, of wanting to both contribute, to actualize my potential, and discover everything that life has to offer within the context of my own life. So when I look at my own life, I see that so much of my time is devoted to both inner work and work in general. So there is definitely a kind of spiritual warrior archetype that lives in my soul. And at times I see that I can have difficulty in simply releasing that, relaxing back, and not moving forward in some sense. Even it can be within the context of inquiry or meditation or learning. There is this momentum that drives me forward, and I see that one way it comes to expression, beside the good effects that it brings, is a sense of striving, that there is a sense of relentlessness to that as well, which is not that pleasant, which can feel straining on my psyche and my soul. And yeah. So there's a part of me that also longs for even more softness and even more enjoyment of the simple things, and also the ability to enjoy myself when I'm alone without necessarily doing work as such, whether that be inner work or creative projects or becoming something. So it touches me to hear you speak about this as an elder and as someone who has dedicated several decades to the path of self-discovery and understanding and realization and also actualization. So I feel that there is a thread that connects us all, actually, after hearing also Elin speak. And yeah.
I'm really touched listening to you talk about the striving and the kind of pressure that you sometimes feel. Because I haven't watched too many of the podcasts, but I looked a little bit at a few of them. And one thing I was struck by in all of them, and I felt it again here as we began, was the kind of space that you take and you allow and you invite in the podcast context of just, we can just sit and look at each other for minutes, or we can just taste the feeling of being here together. We can feel our hearts. That sense, it was very palpable to me in the other podcasts I looked at, and I've feel it here with you today. So it's interesting feeling almost like, oh, here in this context, you let everything else go and you're just here, not trying to get anywhere, but just be here. And so I'm just holding those two in my awareness as I'm sitting here with you, and it's touching to feel, both elements. The one that you described, that you feel as you go through your life, and the one that you manifest here with me, with us, with the people that you talk to. I don't know whether that resonates for you, but I'm touched by it.
That does resonate. That does resonate. And just to reveal me, I mean, in this space, I feel that the space that you're talking about and this dimension of being, of just pure exploration, and in some sense, giving myself completely to the flow without having an agenda, comes so natural. Mm-hmm. And I do experience that sometimes in daily life, but I wouldn't say that. I would also say that there is this very active drive that has this sense of striving. So it's more readily available within this context for some reason. I don't know if you can speak to that or have any idea why that may be. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, It reminds me, I'm pretty certain that I'm a 7 on the enneagram. And one of the elements of the 7 that I feel most connected to is the sense of the experience of the flow of reality, the flow of being, the flow of creativity, the flow of aliveness. And it's something that I've always felt a connection with, but it's also been the context in which I feel in some way the most pain and suffering, because in a deep way, historically, I grew up feeling that the flow was happening, but I was not part of it. And so on some level, I'm always trying to get into the flow. I know enough of it that if I can be in it, I know I can relax and be taken and feel nourished and feel gifted and blessed with what it's like to just be in the flow of things happening and not having to have a plan, not having to have an agenda, have somewhere to get to, but just really feel that incredible dynamism of life moving and not having to try and be in charge of it, but just be carried by it. So I've always been very attuned to the places where I could feel that. For me, for many years, it was dance. I was in improvisational dance and something called contact improvisation, where you put your focus on a point of contact between you and another body. And then you keep your focus there and the two of you move. And so you end up following this point of contact, rolling on each other, going down the floor, coming back up, leaning into each other, pulling away, lifting the other person, falling on them. All these things happen, but it's because you're following this point of contact. So it creates a flow, in a sense, that is coming out of your body's movement in space and the other person's body and how your weights fall together. So it's not like you don't have any impact, any way to have an impact on that flow. You do. You could push harder, you can relax, you can let go, you can jump, you can do things, but the point is you need to keep that point of contact, and that's where the integrity of the dance comes from. So you're really in this dynamic between your own energy and your own inspiration, and then what is needed to follow the dance. And so that was a context where I very much knew this sense of flow and being able to let go into it and give over to it and feel these amazing dances that would happen with people out of that. But I was also aware that in the rest of my life, I didn't feel that kind of flow. I felt much more like I was trying to make things happen, be in control, make my life work, deal with the issues, work through things that were in the way. It was like a lot of work, and that sense of flow was sort of like something that would be such a great relief when I'd find some place where it could happen, sometimes in a conversation, sometimes in listening to music, sometimes in dance, but it was always very limited where that would happen. And the rest of the time I was trying to find the flow in whatever was around me and somehow get myself into it, because I felt like that was the fundamental thing about my identity, was that I was not part of the flow. I had to somehow get into the flow. So it's this, kind of strange thing where I have to be the one in control and active in order to get into this place where I don't have to do it, where life will take me. At any rate, that's something I don't know whether it's directly what you experience, but I can feel that split in a way that you're talking about, where if you have a certain kind of context in which you can let go of everything else and just open yourself and feel carried and feel the love of that, and it feels so natural and just the right thing. But then outside of that particular context or structure or whatever, it seems really hard to come across. There seems to be something else at work, or something else at play that's making it be a struggle of a kind, a certain kind of effort, a certain kind of challenge to keep things going. And so it's been, I think, I'd say one of the kind of elements in this transition that I was talking about towards slowing down is recognizing that when I feel not in the flow, I always have ideas about what I need to be doing to be in the flow, or what the flow is like and what's keeping me from it. So I always have this, on some level, I have some kind of idea about what flow is and why I'm not in it, or what I need to do to get into the flow, or if I can just get certain things happening, get things arranged a certain way, it will flow. I won't need to be doing. But it's always an agenda kind of I have. And so part of this transition has been, and it's, a central tenet of the work is just to keep coming back to what's actually happening here right now. And the flow is always in this moment, but so long as I'm thinking that I have to do something to get into the flow, I'm looking towards something in particular that's not right here. And that's one of the biggest challenges for 7 is to give up the planning, give up the agenda, the idea of how things should be happening, where it should be going, how it works. I mean, a lot of my joy in life is a curiosity about how things work. How does nature happen? How do these things occur? What is this way that things happen? And so it's always this desire to understand the process, understand the flow. But secretly, it's because I want to know how to get into it myself. And so it's a, you know, it's a dance, and I'm more and more gradually learning to have that curiosity really fuel more fundamentally just being here with the wonder of things, rather than it being some kind of secret way to figure out how I'm going to belong and be a part of things, and recognize that I'm always a part of things. It's, even though there's that feeling like I'm outside of it, like somehow it's going without me.
I feel the depth of the truthfulness of what you speak inspires me. It's such, so inspiring to listen to. And what I find inspiring is there's something about truth, definitely. Just speaking the truth, sharing the truth as it is, particularly when in this context, in such a context that we share here, where there is that field and space of openness. And while I speak, I'm reminded of the world situation where my personal perception is that there is such a lack of great and deep leadership. When I look at the world leaders, I find that leadership is so rare, good leadership. And the person that comes to me as an example of good leadership, who also embodied a certain type of truthfulness and integrity, is Nelson Mandela. I read his biography, and I've also looked at some of his videos when he came out of prison. And for me, that's such a good example of a strong leader that you just feel is integral to the bone, to his cause, to his people, to that which is right. And what you're sharing here reminds me of that spirit, actually. And that's what I find inspiring in being with you and hearing you speak. Yeah.
I like that word, integrity.
To share another thing, I'm pretty 95% certain that I have an Enneatype 3 complex. So that's where a lot of the drives is connected to, without a doubt. So,
I mean, to succeed,
and then to be better, to be a better version of myself in all areas that are relevant, in all ways that I can be the best possible version of myself. That's such a deeply, deeply ingrained both wish and also in some sense ambition and drive. And I also know that there is a kernel of truth in it, in that there is it points to a certain potential, my true potential, or the true potential of my soul within the context of this incarnation. So I can feel when I really just release fully to the spirit of it, there is a pure sense of aliveness in that dynamism and that drive, and also intelligence. I really feel the optimizing force embodied, embedded in that drive. And then I also see how it is multidimensional, how my ego also appropriates it and reifies it, and then it can get kind of straining or become a fixation that then collapses or leads to a sense of contraction, and also can invoke or bring in superego, right? Comparison, particularly in terms of accomplishment and achievement. So it's such a complex and nuanced and multidimensional force. And I feel myself on all levels. And that's what I see in my daily life, how it operates. And it's such that particular dance is so central to my soul, to my lifetime, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I think of with the three, the sense of the doer. It's the place where we actually discover more about what true action is, where it comes from. It's like part of that dance that you're describing is who actually does, what is the doing, what is, you talk about becoming the best, becoming more fully. What does that mean? Is there a doing in that? Is there a, and what are our beliefs about that? So it's part of what I'm hearing as you're talking about that multidimensional process that goes all the way from our superego to our heart. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the true dynamism, unfoldment of being, but also living through us as individuals and our histories and our ideas about what we are. Yeah.
I need to laugh a little bit because I get so nervous.
What are you nervous about, Aileen?
Yeah. My heart is racing. It becomes like, no, it's just, I'm just so aware of my own fear, like, for this topic. And yeah, my enneagram teacher told me I'm a 6, so it seems pretty aligned with that. That is my reaction, the anxiety and the fear of other people. And almost in every podcast, actually, I'm sometimes really connected with like the fear of, I don't know, humans. And then I'm still always showing up. I guess that makes me counterphobic.
Well, maybe.
Laugh about it somehow. I don't know. I also felt I wanted to share it since both of you shared, and it's such a intimate, revealing part of my structure. Like the sense of embarrassment, and also, I don't know if it's shame coming up, but it's a bit like, oh, I want to go and hide. And that made me start to giggle. Yeah.
Well, it seems like counterphobic in some ways is action to cover or deny the fear. Like, I'm not going to feel this fear. I'm just going to do it anyway, or I'm going to. I don't have fear. I can go wherever I want to go, or even though it may be a reaction, but there's a sense of denying the fear. Whereas what I'm hearing with you is that you're just showing up anyways, but you're aware of the fear. You're not going away from it. You're not letting it run you. So it seems like it's part of the action of the developing six to find your ground and just being here, staying here, learning to have faith and trust in showing up and being real. And that includes a lot of fear. Fear of just really being alive and being here, being present with other people, being open to how we're affected, what gets touched in us.
Yeah, I resonate with that, like the showing up part. And I'm wondering then if it's because I'm learning and putting so much trust into like the diamond approach concept or people that are working with themselves that I can feel more relaxed. But as well, the maturing of knowing, haven't touched home, haven't touched upon holy faith or holy strength, and have felt those qualities inside me, and maturing the, I don't know which part I am maturing. My being, I guess, my soul. But yeah, almost every podcast, I sometimes feel very scared and very little. Um,
I feel touched that you share it. You're willing to let that be seen, be here.
Yeah. And now this is a field between us, but I also hope that that can somehow inspire another person to show up, even when it's scary, painful. Yeah. Oh, that touches home somehow. That's like I can feel the tears somehow in my eyes, not shed. Yeah. There's a liberation and grief, maybe. Yeah. To show up.
One thing that came to me recently, actually, which is linked to my conversation with Vince, because he recommended to me the book Heart Dweller, which was one of Hamid's early works, from what I gather. And if I read correctly, you were the editor of that book. Is that correct? Or
I mean, it was something that that he wrote a long time ago, and I helped just bring it into a form that we could publish it. And there was some editing of it.
Yeah.
And
I've read the majority of the Diamond Approach books, and I know that you've been a big part of developing those works. And the first thing I'm curious about is A.H. Almas is Hamid, for anyone who doesn't know him, is the founder of the Diamond Approach. And I'm curious, what is your relationship to Hamid? How would you describe Hamid in his personal relationship with you? I'm curious about that.
Well, even though I've been around him and was kind of in the second group of people who began working with him, I was not there at the very beginning, but so I've been around him and supporting him and obviously learning from him for 40 years. But some of my colleagues have been friends of his, like they have social contact. Hamid Kabazar, who recently passed in the last year or more, he was a good friend of Hamid's, and they would have meals together and just hang out and drink tea and so forth. And I never developed that kind of relationship with Hamid. I felt comfortable being around him, going up to his house, sometimes for business things, but a lot because of the small group that he had there that I was a part of. But a lot of our contact outside of the strict teaching context, where I just felt like a student of his, like everybody else, has been through the books. And even in that context, we don't have a lot of contact. It's more like at certain points in the process of developing a book, I'll be in communication with him, often just through email, but sometimes in person, discussing questions about the book itself or questions about what to do next as a book. And so various just logistical and editorial and issues related to bringing the books into the world. And I've always been I feel like he's been a great teacher. The other context that comes to mind where I have contact with him is around when as I'm leading different groups. There are times where I have questions about the material. Sometimes there's questions about how to move through the curriculum, or occasionally how to deal with certain situations with students. What does he recommend? What would he suggest to do in these contexts? And I've always been impacted by his point of view and how to deal with situations. Because he exposes that part of me that wants to get in there and figure out how to resolve a situation. And sometimes, because one of the things I learned from this, I often have a tendency, I think many of us do, to jump in too quickly and try and work something out or fix something before we really have a sense of what's actually going on. So one of his main teachings, not verbally to us, but modeling, is that something will arise in the school or with a student or with a situation, and there'll be, there's some kind of problem going on over here. And he won't, generally, unless it's really a dire situation, he won't jump to do something about it. He'll say, well, let me know what you know about it, and I'll wait to hear from some other people. And so he may wait several weeks or months even, letting things, some of it settle out by itself and other things get more pronounced and come to the surface more. And then see how other people are seeing it. Is it just this one person, or is it just this one group that's having this, or is there something more going on? And so it's a process of, from the outside, it can look like he's not taking action. He's just like passive. He's just kind of sitting there and letting things happen. But from closer to the situation, you realize he's on the one hand waiting to see what's really going on here, letting it have time to reveal itself rather than assuming from the first things you hear that this is what's happening, or this needs to be dealt with, or this is a problem. Let's wait and let's see. And often the more you wait and the more information comes in, what needs to be done gets clearer. And sometimes it's not a lot that needs to be done. Sometimes it is something significant that needs to happen, but by waiting and really allowing it to unfold and emerge and kind of become clear what's really happening, then any action taken is much more effective and often less complicated or less busy than if you jumped in at the first moment to try and work it out or make something move or whatever. So there's that kind of learning from him that I've had over the years, some in the books, but more in the context of the teaching and how teaching happens and how to support the teaching and how to work with it. Not the content of the teaching so much, but more how the realization of his wisdom that comes from his own profound depth of being and knowing, how that supports and actually embodies that wisdom in dealing with situations around the teaching. So I feel like I've learned a lot from him, watching how he deals with situations. And sometimes he'll speak about them. Sometimes one of us will ask, well, why did you do that? Why didn't you do that? And then he will speak about it, and he'll make it more understandable to us, something that might not have been obvious looking at it from the outside. We'll get more a sense of where he was coming from and what his perspective was. And it's often humbling and clarifying of the difference between coming from our preconceptions or our familiar self or whatever, and coming from a place where there's much less in the way of just being an expression of being in living and dealing with these various elements of running a spiritual school and teaching people and supporting them to grow. And yeah, he's not like some people in positions of power or leading organizations or whatever who are always ready to tell you at any time what's the right way to do things or the right principles to be following, whatever. There's much less of that in my experience with Hamid. There's this kind of sense of just openness, and then helping align us with just being more grounded in the truth. I mean, letting that bring forth rather than having some kind of developed conceptual principles and ideas about how best way to make things happen and run an organization or do head up a school or whatever. So on the one hand, it's like you don't have those kind of rules and structures and to rely on to tell you the right way to operate. You feel more like you're in this open, unknown kind of field of life. But in that openness, with a little support, we can feel a ground in the truth that gives us a very different kind of orientation and guidance than conceptual principles and ideas about how to make things work. That isn't to say that sometimes getting somebody in who knows about organizational development or knows about working with teams or whatever, that there's many things to learn from those kind of approaches, which is not his forte. He doesn't really know much about team building, about how to run organizations, but he does have that just immovable alignment with being that really reveals what's missing in so many of these other approaches, the lack of that trust and connection with the depth of truth about reality. So I feel very, very grateful to have been able to be in the relationship that I've had with him. It's not been as I said, a very personal one. He knows me certainly, and occasionally we have personal connection, but not that much in the usual way that people think of. But I feel his presence in my field, and I feel his availability, that I can reach out to him. He will respond, and but also that he's just there as someone that I can learn from, not just with his actual teaching, which I learn a huge amount from, but by his presence and his being and the way he goes about things. And yeah.
Yeah. I feel the depth of the significance of that, and that transmission, not necessarily only through the teaching, but observing how people function, how people deal with life, how people deal with certain situations. And I'm so sad to see that seeing human beings in that level of the embodiment is so rare for most of us, or not, doesn't happen for most of us. There are obviously people who do well in business or in leadership, that they achieve certain things, but that sense of leadership from the depth of being, and where there is this groundedness in truth itself, that is a very rare thing. And both in family situations and also organizationally. When I look at my life here in Norway, I live in Oslo, I also find that true leadership, that where I recognize that light and that depth, obviously to level of Hamid, is extremely rare, but even like a substantial depth of embodiment is extremely rare, I would say. Although you see people, there's so a lot of, there are many good-hearted people, there are many good human beings, definitely, but I do see that there is so much superego, so much standards we're adhering to, and then these identifications with the self-images, with the ego, and that container that we live within, that box that we live within, and for me, it's clear that much of the mess that we're in as a civilization is definitely linked to that knot, and it doesn't look like it will resolve anytime soon, based on just my eyes, what I see, because in my environment, my peers, meaning the people in my age group, my genuine sense is not that there is a lot of deep spirituality. When I mean, even if you just dive 10 meters below the surface, some people will be a little bit receptive to that and say, wow, that is so deep. And they won't necessarily follow that thread, but they will be like, whoa, mind opening. And then they will usually continue in the same current. So my impression, looking at the world as it is not that spirituality is blooming. I feel more that we're in some kind of dark age, also in my peer group, which is what it is. And at the same time, looking at the consequence, I do notice that it saddens me, or it. Particularly when I think about my niece, I think about my nephew, I think about people particularly younger than me, the next generation, and my wish for them to be able to grow up with minimal unnecessary suffering and minimal issues that could be avoided. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. It's true. It's true.
It makes me a bit thoughtful, and I don't know, I'll just try out the words in my head and my mouth, and we see if we want to keep it or not for later. But this, I'm curious. All of a sudden, I know, Byron, you wrote the book Soul Without Shame, and it's about the superego and the structures, just the superego structure. And I myself am like a community builder where I live in Molkom. And we're starting something great, or we're starting a community within the community, of people gathering and wanting to live to our highest potential. We say this is the reason why we're meeting, and how to live together and work together, not live together a household, but meeting twice per month for dinners and collaboration. And I'm one of the space holders for this, but there is a lot of, when you get community, you will get conflict. And what we are working on now is the fact that some people in the community wants to exclude other people in the community from circles, and how I don't know what to call it, like sensitive, or how wounded that is. Like how wounded a heart is to go and say, like, no, I don't want you to come to this circle I'm creating in the community. Like, I don't even want you to look at me if we are in the same room. And then that, like, I don't know, it's just like my entire body tenses up at this topic, and feeling like I'm in a situation where I want to provide for the good of the entire community, and like finding agreements where like we agree that it's not allowed to exclude one another, but also invite for, like, yeah, if you want to be a part of this, then you need to look at yourself. If you have a lot of tension with someone else, then look at it, or seek mediation or seek support. And but it's so dense. The energy is so dense. And I'm also getting quite some backlash for standing up for this, that I think this should be one of the agreements. At least that's what I'm feeling. It might not be the truth entirely. But I'm curious about this concept of like this denseness and the superego and exclusion. I don't know, something like that. I don't know if something comes up for you, Byron, but it came up in the space for me. Mm-hmm. Would you like to speak to it? And maybe you will see as well.
Well, I certainly can resonate with the situation you're talking about. I recently was consulting with a newer teacher who I do supervision with, and it was still somebody who'd been a teacher for quite a while in school, and she had gotten to a point where she did not want to be exposed to this other teacher. And she was concerned about being in Zoom groups. This person was in a larger field, it was not an immediate circle that she was in, but it was in the larger field of teachers. And if we were going to have a teacher retreat, or like the one coming up, where we were going to have teacher body meetings and they break up into breakout rooms, she could end up with this person. And she just felt adamant that she couldn't be with that person in an inquiry. And so she was concerned about whether it meant she just couldn't participate, or whether there was some way, if it did end up she was with that person, she'd just have to leave the breakout room, and she didn't feel like she could explain why. So it was interesting because I invited the fact that we try and do clearings in the school with people that we have some kind of difficulty with, in order that we can get to a point where we can do inquiry with people. It doesn't, you don't have to be best friends with them or anything like that, but you want to clear the field so that you can do inquiry. You can be present with them. And she just did not see any way that she thought about trying to do clearing, but she just realized she couldn't imagine it. And I could feel on the one hand the principles that we have in the school, and the beliefs that if we look at our stuff and we really explore where our reactions come from and why we feel so unsafe and that kind of thing, we can find a ground in ourselves to be present with other people, no matter how we feel about them as an individual. So that's the principle. But on the other hand, there was this person who clearly was not a beginner. She's a teacher, and she's done a lot of work on herself, and yet she was at this place where she just couldn't be with this other person. And I didn't even know the person. She didn't tell me who the person was, and it was, it was striking to me. Not that I felt like there was something wrong with her. It was more like recognizing that despite our principles of how we want to operate or be able to operate, it doesn't mean that we can necessarily do that all the time. That there are forces in us, whether it's, often it is from our history, it is from certain patterns that got set up in us to feel like we can survive. We can keep ourselves safe. We can allow ourselves to be open, that we need certain holding for that, or whatever it is. There's ways that we can't necessarily live up to the principles of the standards we would like for ourselves, but that's also part of our work, is to be where you are and not try and push yourself to be somewhere you're not. Now, in your community, these are not necessarily people who've done a lot of, I don't know what kind of spiritual work they've done, if any, on themselves. And so you may have people who haven't done a lot of work on themselves. But I'm just saying that even people who have done a lot of work in this school, we can still be at places where, much as we would like to be operating differently, we're faced with certain inner experience that we can't deny. And I remember years ago actually feeling like I learned a lot from a colleague of mine in the teacher group that I was in. And she was having a lot of conflict with another teacher in the group. They had a history together, various kinds of things. And, this seemed to be just the kind of thing where you do a clearing between them. But this one woman said, "No, I'm not ready to do a clearing. I cannot do a clearing with you." And just said no. And the righteous part of me said, "What do you mean no? You're a teacher, you've been in this work a long time. We do clearings, you can sit down with them and just," and she said, "No, I can't do that. I'm not ready." And she was she wasn't like defensive and tight and like angry about it. She just said, "No, I'm in touch with myself, and I can see that I'm not ready to be able to sit down with that other person and actually be present enough to do a clearing with them." And, 6 months or a year later, she was in a different place, and she was more ready to do that then. But she was clear enough about where she was to just be able to take a stand and say, "No, I'm not ready. I can't do that now." And that was a great learning for me, because I had such a thing in my head. Well, if you're supposed to do it, and this is how it's supposed to happen, then you just go ahead and do it, regardless of whether you feel ready for it or not, because that's the context, that's the structure, these are the principles we have. And so I could feel the way I'd override my own parts of me because of this spiritual superego about how you're supposed to be if you're a spiritual student who's done a lot of work and knows how things happen. You're supposed to be able to deal with your issues. And so it was, I don't feel like I could have done what she did. I couldn't have. If somebody said they wanted to clear with me, I probably would have forced myself to sit down with them and try and do it, even if I didn't really feel a ground in myself to do that. And it was a while for me to begin to find more of the depth of my own personal ground to be able to align with that and support myself. And there's still ways that I don't feel I'm fully able to do that yet. But it was a great learning for me to just see how she wasn't going to be run by the spiritual superego. She was going to stick as close as possible to her own truth, her own knowing of herself and where she was, what she could do. So those are some of the things that come up in listening to you talk. I mean, I really appreciate the desire to create a space where everybody is welcome, nobody is excluded, nobody is judged, nobody's rejected, at least outwardly. And you can't control people's inner feelings, but you can at least try and create a space and behavior that welcomes people regardless of who they are. And just can't always do that, you know. We can try and set up this principle because it's a good principle. We want to support it. It feels the most enlightened and human thing to do, to welcome everybody regardless of who they are, not judge them, not decide they're not good enough or whatever. And if we're really going to be with the truth of where people are, we may not be able to do that very well, or having that principle might exclude people. I don't know. In other words, I don't have an answer for you, but I definitely can appreciate the challenge of the situation, you know.
For me, it's just inspiring hearing other people who are like mature in a way, still dealing with the same type of human conflicts, and it's quite humbling. Like
I mean, in some ways, it can get more intense the longer you are in the work, because you work through a lot of the defenses that you have and a lot of the layers of what you've identified with. And so in a sense, in many ways, you're more free and open and more able to include more of yourself and other people. But it also means you're less defended from those really young places, from the instinctual places, that those places tend to come more to the foreground. And they're very powerful because they're the original seeds of our structure and the ways we operate. And a lot of the layers on top are trying to manage those forces, instinctual energies and traumatic experiences and so forth. So in some ways it gets easier the longer you do the work, because you have more flexibility, you have more space, you have more freedom, you have more openness. But you also become exposed to deeper parts of yourself that are very challenging, you know, maybe hypersensitive, maybe very vulnerable, feel very vulnerable, may feel full of rage and hatred that you've been able to manage and keep control of. And so, yeah, it's a double-edged sword as we mature. Hopefully the maturing is strong enough to hold, at least to begin to work with some of those deeper, younger parts of ourselves that have been hidden or been kept in check for so long. But sometimes they can come forward and really show their power, and it takes a lot to acknowledge them and respect them, and not just want to shove them back down again, cut them off, and just be the good spiritual person that you've been working on for so long. Yeah. It's humbling. It's very humbling. And I think for me, it makes me, I mean, I feel the same kind of frustration and grief and sadness and all those things about the state of the world and where, you know, the kind of polarization, the kind of hatred and aggression and all these forces that seem to have been kind of let loose in the last 5 years. Almost the pandemic almost seems like it let loose a bunch of things at the same time as it brought us together in certain ways. But anyway, it gives me more appreciation and more humility around the potency of those energies that move through us as human beings. And that even though we may be in a context and in a situation where we feel like we can hold the aggression or we can hold the deep, painful feelings and suffering, we're also blessed to have contexts that support us to be with ourselves in that way. And so many people in the world don't have any kind of context like that. And just knowing how difficult it can be for us as we go deeper into ourselves. That it's not a case of it just gets easier and easier and smoother and flows along better and better every year. No, it you know, there's just so much stuff in us to be with and to try and include and welcome in your issue about being inclusive, you know, and we're doing that internally, all of us, as we're growing. It's just, you know, I just really have a lot of appreciation for the challenge in our world, for all of us as human beings. And don't feel, I feel far away from being able to take a position like I know how we should solve all this, or I know people should behave, or I know the best way to deal with the situation. The ones out there in the world, it's just like I can't claim to know anything about, even though, you know, I've spent 30, 40 years doing this work of trying to become more real and more connected to truth. And yet I feel like there are ways that I recognize how little I know about reality and human nature, even as I have accumulated a certain amount of wisdom that I can pass on through teaching and being with people. It doesn't mean that I really actually have answers. The best I can do is just encourage everybody to find out what's real for them. I feel less and less ability to look at a situation out there and say, oh yeah, this is what these people need to be doing this, or those people should do that. I don't know. I can only speak for the situations I'm close enough to and can actually engage with the people involved and see what I can about my truth, their truth of the situation, and hopefully have some way of supporting that deepening. But yeah, it's very humbling for me.
Thank you. I'll bring your words with me in my process.
Yeah.
My internal sense, my intuitive sense that what you just shared was a wonderful way to close this space, actually. So that's what I'm left with after your sharing. And in myself personally, I feel very much at home having been with you, Byron, and I feel deeply, deeply touched by my connection with you in particular. And I described it in the beginning, and it's still with me here now. And it's like a true essential inner comfort. And there's a particular kind of preciousness and value to that. And observing, witnessing your sharing, how the space have organized itself. Actually, before coming on, I was reflecting on the principles that govern this particular podcast, and it's a self-organizing intelligence that is the primary principle in these podcast episodes, in the spirit of non-doing foundationally. So I'm so grateful for the revelation, and want to say thank you to you for coming on again. And yes, I can see that also Aileen feels a lot of gratitude for this space and what's been shared.
Yeah, I feel a lot of tenderness. I'm aware as I listen to you, and just in the sense of the connection with both of you. I feel your heartfulness and your openness and your receptivity and your willingness to reveal yourselves, and it touches me. I feel the warmth and the gentleness and the caring in this field between us, and the invitation to let be revealed what wants to come forth here and what did this morning for me, this evening for you all. And I feel a lot of gratitude and appreciation. I really didn't know what it was going to be like. I did feel some trust from the energy that I got from you in communicating, and also a little bit in the other podcasts I saw. It seems to have been well placed, the trust. And so I'm happy to be here and be with both of you. I hope maybe we'll run into each other again. Maybe I'll see you in Welcome and Angsbaka, and I'd like to.
Probably. I'll drop by and say hello at lunch.
Good. And maybe Wazee will connect in the flesh someplace at some point.
Inshallah. Yes, that'd be wonderful. Aileen, do you want to share some last words?
Love. Just love and gratitude. And yeah.